All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining me with this neuroscience and leadership information session. Purpose today is for me to get a chance to share some of the information that I have about how our brains work and how that can benefit us when we are trying to improve our performance at work, when we're trying to lead others. And it's a different approach using some neuroscience and cognitive behavioral psychology lessons in this. So that's part of the reasons to share that. Also, I want to get the word out about my leadership development practice and how it's a little bit different. And the more people that know about what I do, the more people I can help. And there's a couple people on here who know me already, but I'd like to go ahead and give a little bit of a background, give you some information about, why the heck should I listen to this guy. As I said, my name is Kevin Zachary, and I was born in Paris, France, raised in Eagle River, Alaska, and one of those items will actually play a part later on, but it's just an indication that I'm a little bit different, maybe. But I've been a student of leadership development for about the last 33 years, ever since I started my Navy Junior ROTC class in high school. I graduated from the United States Naval Academy, and I spent 11 years as a naval officer. I served on an ammunition cargo ship, a guided missile cruiser, and an amphibious assault battle group on the commander's staff, and I helped handle multinational expeditionary exercises in the Mediterranean Gulf, or in the Mediterranean Sea and the Persian Gulf. How I got into this business, one of my tours as a young lieutenant was as the assistant chairman of the Naval Academy's Department of Leadership, Ethics, and Law. And that's where I taught leadership and ethics classes and realized that I really enjoyed the being in the position of sharing leadership experience, sharing paradigm shifts for people to help them change their behavior and be better leaders and performers. After I got out of the Navy, I went on to serve with a couple of different kinds of organizations helping create leadership programs. One was in a technology startup as well as a division of PBS. And I've recently completed my master's degree in organizational dynamics from the University of Pennsylvania. And I'm writing a book that's based on my thesis, and right now the working title is The Leadership Catalyst: How to Unleash the Power of Others and Become a Force Multiplier in Your Organization. So that's a little bit about my background with regard to the subject. My company, Bravo Zulu Consulting, is named after the initials of the partners. I'm the Zulu, Zachary, and then Bravo. The letters Bravo Zulu mean, in the military, actually have a meaning, and they mean well done. And we help organizations become more successful through communications, leadership, and organizational development. And our goal is, when we work with people, is for them to look back on what they've accomplished and say to themselves, well done. We did a good job. This has been great. So that's a little bit of the background. We're going to talk about a couple of different areas here. We're going to talk about why is leadership an important topic? What does neuroscience have to do with that? And then how can you take advantage of this knowledge and become more successful? I'm going to move through pretty quickly just because there's a lot of information I want to cover in the hour. However, there will be time at the end if anybody wants to stick around and talk on the microphones and ask me questions. I'm happy to stay around for as long as you want to. So the next thing we're going to do is actually a little exercise, and I usually do this in the in-person sessions, but it seemed to work pretty good in the last webinar I did. So we're going to do a little exercise where we're going to cross our arms, not like you're mad or cold, just like you're sitting back in your chair considering something, and it just happens to feel comfortable to cross your arms. And I'm really relying on you to do this where you're at. And hopefully you're in a place where you can talk out loud and not cause too much of a commotion, because there's going to be a little bit of that involved. So the next slide, this next slide is going to be blank, but then I'm going to show another slide. And what I want you to do is to cross your arms and shout out the answer to the question at the same time as you cross your arms. And the idea is to do it as simultaneously as you can. So as soon as you see the numbers, as soon as you see the question pop up there, go ahead and do it. Go. Okay, so I want everybody just to kind of notice that they were probably able to cross their arms and answer the question at the same time. Did anybody notice any kind of delay? If you noticed a delay in answering the question or crossing your arms at the same time, go ahead and raise your hand. And for those of you who joined after I mentioned it, there's a little button, a raised hand button at the top there. Okay, so Frank and John noticed a little bit of delay, and that's fine. Sylvia too. Okay, great. So we're going to do it again, but this time, and 20 was the correct answer in case anybody was curious. So we're going to do it one more time. However, we're going to do it just a little bit different. So this time, I want you to cross your arms, and I want you to look down at which hand, which wrist is on top. So if your left wrist is on top, raise your hand. Okay, so there's a number of people who have the left, all right, and then the rest of you, I'm sure it's the right one. So now, switch your arms and cross them the other way so the opposite wrist is on top. And this should feel kind of weird to you. You might even have to really think about it. It might take you 2 or 3 tries. You wouldn't think it would be difficult, but sometimes it is. And believe me, this all has a purpose. All right, so is anybody if you've successfully crossed your arms the new way, go ahead and raise your hand. I know I'm asking you to unclick the button, uncross your arms to do it, but okay. So it looks like everybody is successful. So now we're going to go through 2 more repetitions, and the idea is to cross them the new way. Okay? So I'm going to flash a equation on the screen. You're going to cross your arms the new way, and at the same time, shout out the answer to the question. So as soon as you see the numbers come up, go to it. All right, so the answer is 24. Now, raise your hand if you noticed a significant difference in your ability to do that than when you did it the regular way. All right, just about everybody's saying that was just a little bit more difficult. Okay, so I'm not going to explain it yet, but we're going to do it one more time. And again, the object is to simultaneously cross your arms the new way and answer this next question. So I'm going to 3. As soon as you see the numbers come up, go to it. Okay, so some of you might have had a little more difficulty with this. Did anybody happen to still cross their arms but cross them the normal way they usually do? Raise your hand if you did that. Okay, so some people raise their hand because they ended up crossing the right way. How many people actually had a pretty good lag? Either they had to answer the question first or they crossed their arms first and then had to answer the question. Okay, so the rest of you. So great. Thank you very much for participating in that. Hopefully it was a good exercise for you. But what I wanted to demonstrate was kind of the lag that happens. And unfortunately, I'm not going to go into any more detail about it now, but we will revisit this. So you'll just have to keep that in the back of your heads until a little bit later in the presentation. But if anybody was wondering, the question, the answer was 300. So we're going to go on to the first talking point, which is why is leadership an important topic, especially with regard to business? And the way I like to say it is that organizational success depends on good leaders and effective leadership development for that. Now, the reason I gave the equation to end up with 300 was because that number has a specific meaning in the presentation. 300 is the number in billions of dollars that the United States loses in productivity each year because of disengaged employees. So the Gallup organization has done a lot of surveys and polling and interviews on this, as well as a couple of other organizations, and they found out that 4 out of 5 workers worldwide are not delivering their full potential to help their organizations. That's 4 out of 5 workers. In the United States, it's probably closer to 3 out of 5, but that's a significant number of people who aren't contributing to their organization. And the definition of engaged employee is someone who understands what to do to help the company succeed, feels emotionally connected to the organization and its leaders, and is willing to put that knowledge and emotion into action to improve the performance of both themselves and the organizations. So that's what an engaged employee is. So you can imagine that that's a pretty significant number, $300 billion each year that the United States is losing out because people aren't engaged at work. So, and I don't know if anybody notices, but the screenshot of this slide is taken from Office Space, which is a movie that epitomizes disengaged employees. Pretty good indication of the status of a lot of workplaces. So the question comes up is, why are so many employees disengaged? And the reason is because of crappy bosses. Now here's some indications of how you know that's the case. If you look at the Dilbert cartoon, it's in 2,000 newspapers in 65 countries and 25 languages. So there's a reason that this comic strip resonates with so many people. Gallup were working with some middle managers in a bank, and it was a regional bank, and they had middle managers, and they in the exercise, they asked these middle managers write a speech to a hypothetical group of honor students talking about the virtues of the company in hopes of attracting them to join. So the speeches were what you would expect. They were kind of the boilerplate marketing language about the prominence of the company, the chances for advancement, and the generous benefits package. And then after they had all given these little briefs, the people asked the managers to answer a question from one of these prospective students. So the question was, if I join your bank, can you assure me I'll have a really good manager? And all of these middle managers fell silent because they looked around and shrugged because, for all of the grand stuff they were talking about their company, that was one thing that they could not admit to being able to provide for people. So, there's a reason why Scott Adams is worth $75 million, because there's something missing out in the workplace. Now this here slide shows a book that won an award for Best Business Book in 2007. I won't read the title, but there's a reason why this book was so popular, because it reflects what's people's experience out in the corporate workplace. If you've ever at a networking event and you asked the people in a group that you're talking to and said, hey, who's ripping off your company? Who's embezzling from your company? You'll probably get a lot of puzzled stares because, that's typically not something that goes on. But if you ask who in your company is the lousy manager, boy, you'll have stories being told all over the place. It's not hard to find those examples. And it's just kind of interesting that a lot of companies will crack down and do a lot of things to keep from embezzlement and stuff like that, but they allow poor management, poor leadership to go on at the cost, again, as we see in the United States, $300 billion. Gallup says that the impact that a supervisor has in today's workplace can be either very valuable or very costly to the organization and the people who work there. And that's because people don't leave they don't leave companies, they leave managers. That's the one thing that the exit interviews tell, is that the majority of the people are leaving the company because of their manager or boss. So then that leads to another question. Why does this happen? So what I'm going to show you is a slide that I call the skill progression, and it shows the continuum of skills that a person needs. It's a simplified chart, But if you look at it, somebody who's an individual contributor in their company, they're going to be expected to rely mostly on their technical skills, doing the techniques of their job, and a little bit of people skills. Hopefully people will get along, be polite, play well with others. But we don't expect them to have much of the people skills. As you get promoted higher and higher in the company, though, you would expect that someone's skills are going to start sliding over and be more present on how to handle people, how to help them become more effective, how to help them do their work better, and less about the technical side. So this is the way it's supposed to go on. But one of the problems that happens is that any number of reasons people get promoted that have nothing to do with their ability to lead other people. A lot of individual contributors get promoted because they're really good at accounting, doing the numbers, or they're really good at the programming, or they're really good at whatever the technical aspects are of their job. So they get promoted. And the company doesn't provide any particular leadership development to that person, instead relying on that person to bring whatever leadership ability they have naturally. Now the problem with that, if any of you have heard of Daniel Goleman, he's the guy who's popular for the emotional intelligence fame, and he says that most people's leadership behaviors are picked up subconsciously. The lessons we get early in our life as we're growing up, we get from observing teachers, coaches, clergy, our parents. And those are the lessons that we absorb about leadership. And if you can think about it, most of the examples that we see during those times that we're going to take notice of are not necessarily the good examples. So that's what most companies are relying on people to present when they get promoted in a company. So if you think about it, we're all familiar with the angry sports coach who throws a chair across the court, or we've all been familiar with seeing our parents fight. And those are the lessons that we bring with us, so that when we're in that leadership position in a company and someone brings some kind of adversity or problem to us, we tend to follow the actions that have been conditioned from what we've seen. That's why you get the managers who kick a trash can or slam a door or yell at their people. So why that happens brings up the next talking point, and how does neuroscience relate to what I'm saying? So for neuroscience, both neuroscience and cognitive psychology teach us about how human beings are wired. So the more you know about how we're wired can only be a good thing. So if you think about it, we're wired a particular way, and just like a computer, the more we know about how that machine works, the more successful we're going to be in our lives. So we're actually going to take a look at the brain, a really close look, right into the neurons. Now in our brains, we have 85 billion neurons. And that means 100 trillion connections. So if you think about it, that's a lot of processing power in one little place. And as far as we know, the human brain is the most advanced computational entity we know of so far in the universe. Granted, we haven't seen very much in the universe, but right now, that's the most complex processing entity. So a question comes up, if you're a questioning type, of why do we need this kind of complexity in our brains? So the answer is that when you take into account all of the sensory organs and sensory elements of our body, we bring in about 11 million pieces of information per second. Now, raise your hand if you've heard the saying, we only use 10% of our brains. So a number of you have heard that. So that's a common phrase we like to say. But the reality is that we use 100% of our brains. We're just not conscious of all of it. And that makes sense, because if you had to consciously think about blinking your eyes and breathing and sweating and digestion and perspiration, I mentioned that twice, it's a hot day, all of those different things, as well as trying to figure out a math problem, then we would get bogged down. So the way the brain developed has adapted to that, and it's very much like an iceberg. The top part that's above the water is the conscious part, and the part that's below is the subconscious part. And one of the reasons that the whole 10% conversation came up is because we're only aware of a little bit of what our brain does. Now, scientists have actually studied how much out of that 11 million pieces of information, how much our conscious can handle. And it's about 40 pieces of information. So if you think about a phone number is 10 pieces of information, and if you're driving a car trying to type in the phone number, you're pretty much using up all of the conscious working parts of your brain, which is why a lot of states have determined that it makes sense to make it against the law for brand new teenage drivers to not text, to not use their phone, to not have other kids in the car, because their conscious brain it's so new to learning how to drive that they don't have any leftover space to do all that. However, those of us who've been driving for 30, 40 years, we've made so much of that motions on a condition level that we have freed up a little bit more of space. Still not enough necessarily to handle, texting on a phone while you're driving, but it's why we can, be a little bit more aware of the road while still talking to someone in the car and looking around at the scenery. So that means the subconscious handles the rest of that information. And that's a lot of influence. That's a lot of influence on what our brains do and our actions in the world. So we're going to take a look at just a simple act of talking to someone, how this neuroscience translates. So one thing to be aware of is that when we talk about 130 words per minute to 150 words per minute. That's pretty much the range. If you are a professional auctioneer, you can probably talk 250 words per minute and still be understood. Now, when someone's presenting, they tend to talk a little bit slower. I actually talk pretty fast, so and partly because there's a lot I want to get in this hour, but that's about 110 words per minute. Now, the brain itself, however, can process anywhere from 1,000 words per minute to 3,000 words per minute. So that's a big discrepancy in what is being said and what can be processed. And scientists actually have a name for that. It's called the speech-thought differential. Now, one thing I will mention too is that the 3,000 words per minute might be a little bit on the lower side, just because that's not taking into account the nonverbal parts of our brain. That, for example, when we remember something, it's like a little movie vignette. So there's a whole bunch of, there might be sounds involved that we can remember hearing, or smells, and it all happens at one time. But we'll go with the 3,000 number. So if you take that 3,000 and subtract whatever the person that you're looking with, or you're talking with, that leaves up to 2,750 words per minute of extra thinking space for your brain to do. Now, I'm pretty sure we all don't think that our brain shuts down when it doesn't have to work. It actually works the whole time. Every neuron is made to be firing and doing something. So with all that leftover thinking space, what's going on? So I'm going to give you, this is another exercise we're going to do. I'm going to give you an introduction to what some of that thinking, or that leftover thinking space does. So this is the commentator. So this is the little voice in your head that sits back, kind of watches and comments on everything that's going on in your world. And in order for you to really get intimate with this guy, I'm going to pause for 30 seconds and let you listen to him. So your object, don't be looking at your email, don't be checking your phone, just sit there. If you have to close your eyes with your hands in your lap, just sit there for 30 seconds. Go. Okay, so that was the introduction. Now, for some of you, you might have heard a message, something like, I hope this is going to be worth getting home late. Well, I usually do this in the evening, but you get the idea. It's either a comment like that, or you're thinking about the dog, whether he needs to go out, and you might be thinking about a grocery list. You might be thinking about how tired you were. That might have been the conversation. You might have even been worried about me. 30 seconds. Is he actually going to wait 30 seconds and let us just sit here? Now, when I do this in in-person sessions, there's invariably some person who raises their hand when I say, who didn't hear their commentator? And I said, well, are you sure? Maybe your commentator was saying something like this. Commentator? What does it mean, commentator? I don't have a damn commentator. This is great. Talking about me directing our key or something like that. And I usually end up getting a few laughs when this comes up because they are recognizing that they had some kind of conversation like that. Now, for as long as I've done this, I even know this goes on, I still have the commentator. And it usually says something to the effect of, shoot, I forgot to look at my watch. How many seconds have gone by? 6 Mississippi, 7 Mississippi, 8 Mississippi. I sure hope this works. Hey, is that guy smiling because he just noted his commentator? Or is my zipper down? No, that's not it. Must have been his commentator. All right. Where was I? 12 Mississippi, 13 Mississippi. Darn, I probably should have had that second soda this afternoon. Good thing this is a short talk. Oh, wait, how much time do I have left? I better just talk now. And the funny part is that I've done this enough that actually does go through my head each time because I know that slide's coming up. But the point I'm trying to make is that this is going on all the time. It's all the time there. It's all the time making comments. And it's doing, excuse me, it's doing any number of things. It's rationalizing, it's comparing, it's worrying, it's fantasizing, it's jumping to conclusions. Maybe you're interpreting something they said even though they're not really saying it. So there's a lot of actions going on by that subconscious. So a good way to think of the subconscious is mental processes that are inaccessible to consciousness but influence judgments, feelings, or behavior. So the commentator is just a little insight into that subconscious. And these influences can have positive or negative effects on how the leaders interact with the people around them. So we're going to go through one other little exercise about how conditioned our behaviors are. So I want you to visualize that you woke up this morning, you've had a great night's sleep, and for some reason you were so rested you woke up before the alarm went off. You got out of bed and went down and had breakfast with your family, got to enjoy reading the newspaper, and you even said, you know what, I'm a little bit early, but I'm going to have a nice leisurely ride to work because it's such a beautiful day out. So you're in your car, you're driving maybe 45, 50 miles an hour down the road. The dogwoods are out, cherry blossoms, whatever. You got the windows down, and you come around a corner and you see this. I think most of us will agree that we automatically take our foot off of the gas when we see that, even though we know that we're not speeding. That's the power that your conditioning, that your subconscious has on you. So now I'm going to take us into how all this information moves in our brain and why this happens. So this is an image of our brain, and there's a couple parts I'm going to point out. It's a very simplified image, representation, but this part here we have is the limbic system. So this is the part that's in charge of our emotions, our behaviors, and our memory storage. An aspect of that is the amygdala. The amygdala is in charge of the 4 F's: fight, flight, freeze, or procreate. And then we'll learn some more about that in a second. And then there's the prefrontal cortex, or the cortex, which is actually the whole white part of the brain. But this part of the brain is the executive functions. This is where a lot of our consciousness resides and our personality. Now, this man here won a Nobel Prize. He's a psychologist, but he won it in economic sciences because of his work on decision making. And the reason I bring him up is because he refers to these systems as System 1 and System 2. So system 1 is fast and reacting, and system 2 is slow and thinking. So this is where we're going to go back and refer to the crossing the arms exercise. So when I had you do it the first time where you didn't have to think about it, that was system 1. That was fast, reactive. We all are used to crossing our arms a certain way. Don't have to think about it. Even when I gave you a little mental problem to do, it was pretty seamless. Some people noticed just a little bit of a delay, but for the most part, it was pretty simultaneous. However, when I asked you to then cross your arms, putting the other wrist on top in that new way, that engaged the slow system 2, the thinking side. Now, if that's all we have to concentrate on, that's fine. But if you add other things into the mix, then that gets system 1 involved, and it can interrupt things. So a lot of you noticed that when you tried to do the fractional equation at the same time you're crossing your arms the new way, there was a lot of problems involved. So think about this in a work setting where you have a person who is been promoted, is now leading people, haven't had really any leadership development. Maybe they read a couple chapters in the book about being a leader and said, these sound good, I think I will do those. Well, as long as things are pretty smooth and not too stressing, they might be able to actually do pretty good in using some of those behaviors. But as soon as something comes up that captures system 1, it's going to be like trying to cross your arms. You're going to revert to crossing your arm the regular way, or you're going to stumble and not be able to do it effectively simultaneously. So back to the systems, the way the information comes into our brains and our brains process it is why this stuff happens. So let's just take some pieces of information here, and they enter our brain into two different ways. If it's through our visual, our nose, mouth, and ears, it goes directly to the brain. And I forgot to mention this back at the 11 million pieces of information. About 10 million of that is our visual. That's how information-rich our visual senses are. So a lot of information comes in directly to the brain. Anything that's touch-related or internal goes to the brain through the spinal cord and up that way. So what happens is the information comes into the brain and it meets up at the thalamus. The thalamus can be thought of like a mixing console at a concert. It receives all the signals from into the mixing board, and it says, okay, this information has to go to the lights. This information has to go to the spotlights. This information goes to the microphones. This one to the guitars, etc. So it takes all that information and parses it out. Once it gets from the thalamus, it parses it out to the neocortex. So some of it will go to the prefrontal cortex or the thinking brain. Some of it will go, the visual stuff will go back to the occipital lobe. And then it all goes back to the amygdala. So basically what's happening is the brain says, okay, this information goes to these different places, and then it all comes to the amygdala so that we can decide how we feel about what we're experiencing. So imagine yourself on the beach in Hawaii, and you see a beautiful sunset. So your eyes are bringing in the different colors of the sunset. Your ears hear the wash of the surf. Your feet feel the sand. It's warm breeze. Really nice experience. So your mental thinking brain brings this in, system 2, and then it goes to the amygdala, and the amygdala says, wow, what a beautiful night. I feel really good. So there's another aspect of information that travels from the thalamus through the hippocampus and to the amygdala. The hippocampus is the part of our brain that sets the context for what we're experiencing. So basically it helps us interpret what's going on. So back to the example of being on the beach. If you're on your honeymoon and you're laying on the beach and it's a nice sunset, and you don't have to be anywhere, you're there with your significant other and you've got the fruity drink with the umbrella, life is great. It takes in all that information. Hippocampus says, wow, I'm going to remember this night forever. But if you're there on vacation with your family and the kids are getting hungry and you're late for the luau and you want to get a good seat for the pig roast, Well, the hippocampus says, oh, that's nice, but we got to go. So it's a totally different context of what you're perceiving. So that's how the system one works. So let's look at not system one, I'm sorry, system two. So let's look at it all together. Information comes in, hits the thalamus, separates out, and comes back to the amygdala. So that's what it looks all at once. So now system one gets involved when the thalamus detects something dangerous, like a black mamba snake in front of your face. Now when that happens, system two still works the way I just told you. Information comes in, it says, oh my gosh, that's a snake, goes to the amygdala, says, I'm not very happy about that. System two, however, is a different path. The thalamus sees the snake, information comes into the thalamus and goes directly to the amygdala and says, alert, general quarters. So the amygdala's job is to take care of putting the body onto high alert and getting away from the danger. So it pumps out cortisol and hormones to the muscles to give them quick energy. It quickens your breathing to get more oxygen infused in your system. It narrows your visual acuity so that you're concentrating on either the threat itself or where you need to go to get out of the way. They've done studies, and you actually lose about 30 IQ points because you're taking away resources from the thinking brain. And so it goes into that emergency mode and floods your body and allows you to either jump out of the way or run out of the way or freeze, depending on the situation. So this is going on at the same time that system two is going on. So now I'm going to show you what it looks like when it's all together. So again, this is a very simplified representation, but I think you guys all noticed how quickly the information goes to the amygdala. And this is what's called an amygdala hijack or an emotional hijack. And this is why when we get mad sometimes, people say, oh, count to 10 if you're angry before you say something. Because what the attempt is to get your thinking brain engaged before you resort to behaviors that are not going to be conducive to the situation. So you can imagine how having a crappy boss can be triggering your amygdala. So one of the things they found in the workforce is that when the amygdala is engaged, people are not creative, they're not innovative, they have a hard time thinking clearly, they're definitely not going to be putting in discretionary time. So these are the things that we have to work with in the workforce. Now, it used to be that this served a very reasonable purpose. It used to be that the amygdala was needed so that we wouldn't get stepped on by a mastodon when we're trying to get dinner, or so we wouldn't become a saber-toothed tiger's lunch, or the amygdala kicks in so we don't get a beat down from Thorg and his buddies. Now, I mentioned earlier I grew up in Alaska, but I guarantee you I did not have to worry about this occurring in my life very much. So what that means is that the amygdala has had to find different things to do its job about. So, in today's civilization, we face social realities, but the brain's designed for the physical emergency. So now we get hijacked by different things. The fear of talking in front of people. One of the things that we're wired as human beings is not to be look dumb in front of people. We have a need to look good. Our amygdala will get hijacked when our significant other is angry with us, or if they're disappointed or frustrated with us. Our amygdala gets hijacked if Thorg and his buddies are making fun of us. Our amygdala gets hijacked when we have a crappy boss or a crappy work situation. So Gallup talks about how levels of engagement appear to change not with the economy, but through better managers. And what their results or what their polls are showing is that the managers aren't improving. So the next question is, how do we take advantage of this knowledge? And this is where I come in. My position is that if the more organizations and individuals learn about this stuff, then they can get improved results. And I usually start off by talking to them about cash. But not this kind of cash. This kind of cash. But if you pay attention to this cash, you'll get more of this cash. So let's go back to the cash box itself. So I told you earlier that this is the way it should work. So organizations should be providing leadership development. And some organizations actually do. The problem is, though, that they don't understand what it takes for people to be developed as leaders. They pay attention to the wrong part of the cash box. So if you look at the left side of the cash box, this is what I call the knowing side. It stands for knowledge and skills, and basically it's knowing what to do and when to do it and how to do it. In an organization, this is the major consideration that they make when they're hiring. If you think about it, a resume is pretty much a list of the knowledge and skills a person has and when it was that they used those knowledge and skills. And when companies do train people in leadership or any other kinds of knowledge, this is where most of the money is spent. But what we're finding out is that employees either see that kind of training as an interruption to work they need to be doing, or as a break from work, or they're not going to be able to apply it on the job on Monday. It's going to be business as usual. So it's seen as being a cost of business. So no matter how good the seminar is and you're high-fiving by the end of the weekend, it's still back to work as like normal on Monday. And the reason that happens is because too many people think knowledge is power. But knowledge isn't power. It's only when you apply knowledge that it's power. So that brings up the other side of the cash box. And I call this the performing side. The A and the H stands for attitudes and habits, which is wanting to do the job and willing to do it. Wanting to use those knowledge and skills and willing to do it. And then the habits is just consistently doing it. So think about this. When leaders in companies are counseling or having trouble with people or firing them, it's usually because of their attitudes and habits. It's not because they don't know how to do the programming. It's because they won't do it in a way that's going to support the company. Or they're more trouble than they're worth, even though they might be good at it, because of their attitudes and habits. Unfortunately, very little training and development spent on this because not very many companies know about this side of the equation, of the box. But when it's done right, this is where you see positive behavior change in people. This is where you see the employees being aligned with the organizational goals. This is where this is where you get people to use their discretionary efforts. And you can also show a return on investment on this kind of work. So in this way, it's an investment for business success. So this is the point where you're supposed to just say, aha. So how we do this is what Bravo Zulu's specialty is. So I'm actually going to take you to class and we're going to do some work on the chalkboard. So this is a formula for improving results. So we're going to start with the goal and end in mind, as Covey would say, and that's improve results. Now the nice thing about this formula is that it works whether it's for business or personal reasons. If you want to be more successful in your life, if you want to have improved results in your life, then follow this formula. Now, one of the things about improved results is that if you do what you've always done, then you'll get what you've always gotten. That's what Tony Robbins says. And we've all heard the saying by Einstein, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again expecting different results. So if you want improved results, you have to have different results. So that means positive behavior change. So if you can get people to have positive behavior change, that will get you the improved results. So now we need to fill in the other side of the equation. So the first one is knowledge and skills. People still need knowledge and skills about leadership and how to develop people and communications and how to motivate and all that stuff. That's still important. You also have to know what it's going to be in support of. You have to have goals. Now, it's easy to write goals. It's easy to make them up, but it's hard to have goals that actually support getting things done. So that's why when I do goals, there's a specific type of goal. I call them a SMART goal. So they're specific. You have to say exactly what it is you want. You can't say, I'm going to improve sales next quarter. You have to say, I'm going to improve the number of calls I make, and the ratio of calls to sales is going to be 3 to 5. So you have to write specific things down. Otherwise, you're not going to know whether you've achieved it. You can't have it some amorphous thing. It also has to be measurable so that you can keep score, track how you're doing, so that over the course of doing this goal, you know if you have to pick up the pace, you know if it's not quite working, if you need to change some strategies. It also has to be attainable. You can't say, you can't be 30 years old and say, I want to be president next year, when you have to be 35 to be president. So an attainable goal is important. And it also has to be relevant. So I've given a version of this talk to a local gym as part of a 90-day challenge workout program that they do, health program. And so here's a bunch of people in the room who are trying to get into better shape. And we have this talk about why is it relevant to you. And I guarantee you when you make it relevant on a personal level, it's going to inspire you to do harder work to get your goals. So when that man in the room says, you know what, my cholesterol is high, my blood pressure is high, I'm extremely overweight, I'm doing this because I want to see my son graduate from college. That's a pretty relevant goal. That really makes it important to go to work to get it done. They also have to be time-based. You can't say, oh yeah, someday I want to be rich. If you look at it, there's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. There is no someday. So you have to specifically state, this is when I'm going to get this goal done by. And that actually puts a little bit of a fire to it. And you can always adjust the time based on new information, but that's important to get a goal that's going to help you get those improved results. Now, that goes up into the equation, but we're still missing something. So if you've been kind of following along, you're probably thinking, you know what, we don't have anything on the right side of that cash box. And if you were thinking that, you would be right. So that means attitudes. Becoming a good leader does not happen by accident. Very few people practice these leadership behaviors without having done some kind of reflection or observation or study. So you need to be intentional. So in my equation, that attitude actually is in the position of being a power, an exponential power to the rest, because it's going to help that person leverage the knowledge, skills, and goals. Okay, so how many understand the formula and see where it might apply to what they're up to? Go ahead and raise your hand if you see something in this. Okay, great. Okay, good. So this is a formula for improving results, and it's a great formula, but there's still something missing, and that is being in action. So I'm going to prove this by giving you a riddle. So the riddle is 6 frogs are on lily pads, and one of them decides to jump off. So the question is, how many are left? So how many people think all of the frogs jumped? Okay, and how many people think just one frog jumped? Okay, and how many people think none of the frogs jumped? Okay, so those of you who thought none of the frogs jumped, you're correct. All of the frogs were still there, and that's because deciding is not doing, and knowing is not doing. Now, one of the things that we have to deal with with the way the neuroscience works is we tend to identify strongly with our conscious thoughts. So when we say, you know what, I'm going to do that, or I've decided to do that, we act like that's going to happen, but it's not. There's things that you have to do in order to get that to become habits of thoughts and behaviors. So that's where the second part of the process comes in, and that's the developmental process. So the goal is to get positive behavior change, but you also want it to be lasting behavior change. And I know I'm coming up on the hour time, but we're actually doing a pretty good pace, so we should just be a few more minutes. But one of the things about making it lasting change, if you're exposed to an idea one time you only have about 10% retention after 30 days. However, if you've exposed to an idea 6 times, you'll have about 90% retention after 30 days. So with my developmental processes, I make sure that's incorporated. So my developmental courses and workshops and classes, I incorporate spaced repetition. So for one class in particular, it's 12 weeks long, and we meet an hour and a half every week, and in between times there's homework. There's things that they're doing every day, people are doing every day to get that spaced repetition. So here's an example of what spaced repetition can do for you. How many people, raise your hand if you can finish this jingle. 2 all beef patty special. So a lot of you raise your hand. You recognize the Big Mac jingle. 2 all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun. So here's the significance of that. That hasn't been aired or broadcast in over 20 years, maybe even 30. But we still know that because the advertisers know the power of spaced repetition. They know that when you repeatedly go over things, it's going to create those neural pathways. Your neurons are going to trigger together, and you're going to remember that stuff. So that's why spaced repetition is important in creating positive behavior change. The next aspect is going back to the role that the hippocampus plays in our memory. The hippocampus takes information from our short-term memory to our long-term memory, and it's hyper aware of novel events, places, and stimulus because our brain tries to automate as much as it can to conserve its ability to handle dangers and stuff. And so the hippocampus says, oh, you know what? There's a purple cow in that field. Seth Godin, if you've ever read his books, he's got one called The Purple Cow, and he talks about how things have to be really different and really distinct for people to notice. So that's because the hippocampus gets involved. So that's why in the developmental process, you have to involve things that are going to work the hippocampus. So that means they have to be experiential. This is where people get to practice and start creating those habits. Now, if you guys were here and if you did the arm crossing exercise, then that's an example of an experiential learning practice. You're going to know more about system 1 and system 2 of the brain and how the brain processes that by having done that. The next time you go and cross your arms, you're going to remember, oh yeah, that's right, it's hard to cross them the other way. I challenge you to start crossing them in the new way. But anyway, that kind of exercise helps you start creating those neural pathways and strengthening them with the new behaviors you want to take on, so that when you do come up on that equation involving the fraction, you're still able to cross your arms the way you decided and do that because you created that habit. So another little aspect of a good developmental process is incorporating the whole brain. And one of the things that we've discovered is that we are wired for social interaction, for learning by experiencing what others are doing. And the mirror neurons in our brain, we have neurons that fire when we're talking to somebody. That's why people who've been married for so long can finish each other's sentences or say something out of the blue that the other person says, oh, wow, I was thinking that. When someone tells a story, the reason that we enjoy movies so much is because the same neurons in our brain are firing as if we were doing those actions. That's why you see guys cringe when the baseball movie, the ball takes a wrong bounce and catches the player in a sensitive spot. So to take advantage of that, we incorporate narratives and journaling in our developmental process. It incorporates both sides of the brain, and it also helps internalize that lesson, helps make it relevant. So these are the aspects of what's required to get positive behavior change that has people want to use that discretionary effort and better able to actually change their behaviors. So there's one last little aspect I wanted to share with you that really drives home where this comes into play. And this is in the stimulus response model. Most of us go through life as if there's a stimulus and there's an automatic response that happens. And you know, for some of you, you might recognize this in what I call a jukebox relationship. There's some people, typically there's a person in our lives who is like, when we get together with them, it's like they push a button on our jukebox and we know what song's going to play. There's no question. Press B1 and I'm going to play this song. Sometimes that might be your mother-in-law, it might be a sibling, it might be a person at work, but you know that when they meet up with you, they're going to say or do something and it's going to have you react a certain way. Now this guy here is Viktor Frankl, and he was an Australian neurologist, psychiatrist, and Holocaust survivor. When he was in the camps, he kind of had an epiphany. He realized that they could take away his freedoms, but they couldn't take away how he thought. And what he came up with is that between stimulus and response, there is actually a space. And out of that space is our conditioned behaviors. So one of the things that we can do as human beings is changing the inner attitudes of our minds and have a different result on the outer aspects of our lives. So if we go back to that stimulus and space, what that gives us, if we can recognize that there's that space and we can freeze it in time, this is a reference from the Heroes show, but this guy could freeze time, then that means in that space we have the ability to choose our behaviors. So think about this next time you go and have that meeting with that jukebox person, and they say whatever they're going to say, and you're able to shortcut the automatic response you're going to have and actually choose something different. So I actually have an example of this between me and my wife. It's not a business example, but it's pretty significant. So my wife and I were fairly newly married. We just had a kid, bought a new house, have new jobs, going to grad school. So we have a lot of stuff going on. So there's a little bit of stress in the house. We're definitely really extremely busy. And we happen to be walking down our hallway around the corner into the kitchen, and we're not talking about anything in particular. We're just chatting. So we come into the kitchen, and my wife looks down and says with disgust in her voice, "Oh my God, this floor is dirty. It needs to be mopped." Excuse me. So, I'm taking that as a little more emotion that's necessary. So, I kind of make the comment, well, I don't think it's as dirty as you think it is. You don't have to be so upset about it. So, of course, she looks at me and says, well, you never think anything's dirty. And that's triggering my amygdala. So now I have to either fight, flight, or freeze. And I don't do the first two. I do the first one, and I fight back. And I said, well, you're a little bit uptight in your cleanliness. Things can go a little bit longer. And she responds, hey, you don't do enough around the house, and whatever you do isn't good enough. So you can imagine that, we weren't really talking the rest of the day. And as it so happened, that weekend, I actually went to some training where I learned about the space between stimulus and response, and that we can choose our response. And the exercise was to think back on a recent argument with a person and think about the words that were actually said, not what your, in this case, the commentator interpreted. So I thought about it, and what my wife was really saying was, I have too much on my plate. I can't do all of my fair share. I need you to help me and take on more. And I have to tell you, I felt like a royal ass, because of course I want to be the knight in shining armor to my wife. Of course I want to swoop in and be the hero by taking on more than I should to help her out. So. And I swear to you, this is really what happened. The following week, we're walking down the hallway. It's just like deja vu all over again, as Yogi Berra says. And we're walking in the kitchen, and my wife looks down and says, "Oh, this floor is disgusting." And I felt, pressed B1. I felt the record coming down that I knew what it was going to say, but I stopped it, and I actually stumbled over my words. I said, "You know what? I don't think it's as dirty as you think it is, but I'm happy to mop it. Can I do it after lunch?" And my wife looked at me, and she kind of squinted, and she says, "That's not what you were going to say." And I started laughing, and I said, "No, it wasn't, but that's what I really want to say." So this is the power of this concept, is that you can actually create a possibility for yourself of different things occurring than would have before. My conditioning would have set me up for another fight with my wife, except I was able to recognize that I had a choice in my behaviors. I was able to stop that amygdala hijack and choose a different response. So in the business world, this translates to teaching people the knowledge and skills, positive knowledge and skills, that add to the conditioning, so that when those adversities happen, they can choose results that are going to be more effective, more empowering, build better relationships. So unless you change how you are, you'll always have what you got. So behavior change is a really important aspect of leadership, of going from being an independent contributor to being a person who leads and leads teams and helps develop others. So the bottom line is that companies that pay attention to only one side of the cash box, what they get is business as usual. Training's a boondoggle. There's little retention. Maybe there's a short-term spike in performance, but it goes back to business as usual. However, if you pay attention to the whole box, this is where you get cultures of success. Positive behavior change, employees aligned with the corporate vision, sustained improvement, results-driven, and you can leverage the knowledge, skills, and talent of your people. Daniel Goleman, again, he recognized in his research that in top-performing organizations, there are 10 times more fully engaged workers than disengaged. And if it's just an average one, then there's 2 engaged employees for every disengaged. So you can imagine how terrible the below-average companies are. So coming down to my last couple slides, I have this question, this slide here to say, why do I do the work that I do? And it was when I was writing my thesis that I saw associated myself with a magnet on my fridge that had a quote from Thomas Edison. It'd been there for a while, but for some reason I didn't see it until this one day. And the quote is, "If we all did the things we are capable of doing, we would literally astound ourselves." And I thought about it, and he said, "You know what? I want to help people be able to astound themselves." And I've got a personal mission statement of my own. That's to help people learn to live more powerful, playful, passionate lives. And that's why I do the work I do. And so that's what was the genesis of this presentation, was to get people to start learning more about how our brains work and where there's room to be more successful. And the way I help people learn to astound themselves is I provide performance improvement courses. Those are the 12-week courses that take advantage of the spaced repetition. I do 360-degree assessments and coaching for either people who want to be more valuable at work or people who are already leaders and want to improve the performance of their teams. I do team building and collaboration workshops, and I'm also starting a Leadership Catalyst Intensive course, which is based on the leadership model that I created. And then, depending on how much interest I get, I'm going to start an online performance improvement course. So it'd basically be an online collaboration session where we would do the 12-week program. So the reason I bring this up is if any of you are interested in this stuff and would like to talk to me offline or send me an email, I highly encourage you to give me a call. That's what I like to do, is help people. This session has been recorded, and I will post it online. But I do ask you to tell, if you got some value out of this, please tell 4 friends or colleagues about it, and I'll be sending out the link, and you can pass that on to them. I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn. Bravo Zulu Consulting has a Facebook page, so if you want to leave comments, that would be great. And